This is the online financial school. We continue skills development on a cost-effective platform. This series of lectures covers life insurance, and this particular lecture, lecture number 7, covers unit-linked policies. Unit-linked policies have a certain mystery about them, and what we are trying to bring forward here is, what do they mean when they say a unit-linked policy? What is a unit? Where does the unit come from? How do you buy units? So we come to an explanation of how units are created. We start off looking at unitizing an asset, the process of unitizing an asset. This comes from the breaking of an asset into bite-sized chunks. So you have a house which is worth $1 million. You break it down into 1 million units of $1 each. So you are creating a market in which people can buy and sell those units. Instead of having a market for one house, you now have a market for 1 million units. So you are increasing liquidity. You are creating a market in which those who want to buy our units can meet those who want to sell the units. So when you then sell the house in units, it is much easier, it is much quicker and convenient, and much more affordable. Now, it is important to understand the relationship between the price of the house and the price of the units. In other words, if the price of the house goes up, then the price of units also goes up. If the price of house goes up by 20%, then the price of units goes up by 20%. The underlying price of units goes up by 20%. So if the price of the house doubles, then the price of units also doubles, the underlying price of units. So the unit linked comes from the fact that this units, the price of units, is linked to the underlying value of the asset, the house, the property trust that we have created. So in that sense, we have created a market for units. As the price of the property goes up, so does the price of the house, and vice versa. Now, in the real world, of course, the underlying price of units is distorted somewhat by expenses. And when we look at expenses in this context, we need to understand the expenses of the insurance company, initial expenses, renewal expenses, and termination expenses. But there is another tier of expenses. There is the expenses of managing the asset. So if you are in a property unit trust, there are costs of collecting rent, there are costs of maintaining the house. Those are costs that are different from the life insurance company's costs. Looking at the initial expenses, we are looking at commission and underwriting costs. There is an implication there. And the implication that we have is that in the first year, the premium that you pay is applied to pay initial expenses, not to buy units. So you are likely to have a very heavily reduced allocation in the first year. You are also likely to get something called capital units and investment units. That's just a sanitized way of presenting it. The gist of the matter is that not much goes to buying units in the first year. Renewal expenses, after you have recovered commission, you have recovered underwriting costs, you still have to pay for cost of collecting premiums, for cost of benefit statements, and cost of managing the asset. So in that sense as well, you still have a reduced allocation. You also have something different. When you buy units, the insurance company will add the cost, those expenses, to the price you pay for the units. It's called the bid price. So you buy the units for the price, underlying price of the asset, plus the cost of buying the units. So there is a reduced allocation, or there is a bid price. In other words, you are buying your units at a price that is slightly higher than the underlying asset. Termination, you have to pay the claim. It costs money to pay the claim. So what they do there is that they reduce the price at which they sell units to you. You sell units to the life insurance company. In other words, the offer price, the price at which you can cash out your units, is reduced to take out expenses. So it's important to understand this relationship, that you buy units at an increased price, you sell units at a reduced price because of the intervention of costs. Now, looking at that, we also must understand that there are costs of managing the underlying asset. If the underlying asset is property, then we are looking at a charge, an investment charge, to take into account the cost of managing the property, the cost of managing the underlying asset, which reflects as a percentage on the investment return. So you might find a charge of 1%, 1.25% on the assets to pay for the management of the underlying asset. Now, having done all this, I'm sure you are now wondering, what then will I get as a benefit? Your benefit on maturity is equal to the number of units that you bought multiplied by the price, the offer price of units. In other words, the price the life insurance company buys units from you. Similarly, on surrender, you get paid the price of units multiplied by the number of units, less any expenses or penalties, if any. The same applies on death. Please note that there are no guarantees, and this makes these policies very, very interesting. There are no guarantees either on the maturity value or the expenses. The expenses can be changed anytime. The maturity value depends on the price of the underlying asset. You can add other benefits onto this kind of a policy. So you can add life cover, you can add disability. But what that means is that the cost of life cover or disability will be deducted from your premium before buying units. In other words, you buy fewer units because you pay for life cover first. You buy fewer units because you pay for disability first. But essentially, that's the name.